Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that we may glorify your name in all we do on this memorial of St. Francis of Assisi. We remember his humility, and we ask that we may model that humility in service to you. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, as I mentioned yesterday, today is the memorial of St. Francis of Assisi, who's considered one of the greatest saints in the history of the Church. St. Francis, of course, we know that he actually was from Italy, but he received the name Francis because his father, who was a merchant, had been to France, and he loved the French. He loved France, and so that's where he got his name. Interesting story. He follows several other stories similar, although at different times, of those who had these traumatic experiences that completely changed their lives and led them to an intense conversion of experience. A couple of weeks ago, we talked with Father Joe Laramie of such an experience that St. Ignatius Loyola had in the 16th century. Well, St. Francis lived right around the 12th and 13th century, and he had an experience as well. He was a member of the Crusades. You may look at St. Francis as being this very peaceful saint, but he was literally a member of the Crusades. But he had a tremendous, I think he had experienced something like he fell off his horse or something like that. And because of that, he had some kind of major injury, and it took him some time to recover for that. And in doing so, he too experienced the call of the Lord, but he also came to realize that this whole going off to war thing just didn't really match the gospel. So he became very peace-oriented, and he had a whole new grasp, a whole new embrace of the gospel in a very radical way. He started seeing some followers who came to look for what he had to offer, and so he eventually started his order. This obviously is well over time. It's not like he, came to Christ and then 3 days later he started his order. No, it's well over time. And he had to have permission from Rome to do that. But he started his order, which was called the Order of Franciscans Minor. Well, then you might say, well, where are the Order of Franciscans Major? Well, they don't exist. The Order of Franciscans Minor was putting forth that whole concept of that humility that was a whole how would you call it? I was going to use a word. You probably saw me kind of, or heard me kind of like stop quick, because it's really not a good word in this context, but it also works. Trademark. It wasn't his literal trademark, but that was one of the things he was most known for. It was his humility, his great reliance on the Lord, and he had an intense amount of that very powerful humility which he taught to others. He began a mendicant order, which meant an order of people who were always asking for money in order to survive, but also do things. And they weren't really selling things. They were basically, if you would be so kind as to donate to us type thing. So they weren't beggars per se. They were just and they would do a lot of things in service to the Lord. And there are Franciscan groups, including in Boston, that are very much like that today. And so the order started, and it became an order that also, I want to be careful using this word too. It branched out into different types of orders, and I want to be careful of that word because we're not talking about dividing. We're talking about different ways people embraced what is known as the charism that St. Francis had. So you will find a group of Franciscans called the Orders of Franciscan Minor, which would be rooted in the original order of St. Francis. But then you will also find that the Archbishop of Boston, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, is a member of the OFM, Orders of Franciscan Minor Capuchins, which is a stricter form of the Franciscan order. And so he is the Capuchins, and so he's part of that order. and he is also the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston. So is Archbishop retired Charles Chaput. He too is part of the Capuchin order. So we look at this powerful model that he gave of this faith and his powerful teaching. I don't know if I've told you this story before. I think I have, but when I first came back to the church, I was in California. And I was actually, when I really became strong in the church, I was on a ship, because I was in the Navy, the USS Gray, FF 1054, which was great that I was on that ship for no other reason that it never made it difficult for me to know when the great split between the East and the West was in Christianity, because it was in 1054. That's how I remembered it. But it was FF 1054. So you have that time that I was in Long Beach. And it turns out it was the anniversary, I think. What would that be? 19, so it would be somewhere in the vicinity of, it must have been the birth of St. Francis. So it would have been somewhere in the vicinity of 800 years, I believe it was. So he was born in the 1100s, and this is the 1900s. And so they decided to have this great celebration. Of course, Franciscans, when they celebrate, they can really celebrate. And so this very powerful celebration of the 800th anniversary of the birth of St. Francis. Now, I'm going to talk more on the other side of the break of the rest of the story, which hopefully you'll find a little humor in it, as in fact I did. In the meantime, you're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, right here on WEZE. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. And don't forget our own website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. Check out our website. Check out the archives of the show. Check out our Substack newsletter. Check out all kinds of things over there at CatholicAudiomedia.com. And don't forget to let people know where you heard this program. Whether you hear it at Catholic Audio Media or you hear it elsewhere through the various podcast platforms, or obviously as you're listening to it now on WEZE, let people know and say, you know, I heard this and it was kind of interesting. Hopefully you're saying that. In any case, we want to return to the story of St. Francis. So this was the 800th anniversary of the birth of St. Francis. Now, I'm thinking, looking at the humor situation, that they bought this new house for themselves. It was a big house for the monks in the friars. I'm sorry, friars. You call Franciscans friars. I'll tell that story in another time. But these Franciscan friars were in this house in Los Angeles, brand new to them. It wasn't brand new house, but brand new to them. And so they were just moving in the neighborhood. And all I could think of is the neighbors could be saying, oh, isn't that wonderful? These wonderful Franciscans are moving in, and they're going to be very quiet and be very wonderful. So be wonderful, dear, that we're going to have them next door, isn't it? And then come to find out, it's the 800th anniversary, and they had a wonderful time singing and praising all kinds of songs. Ad infinitum. I don't know how late they stayed, because I didn't stay that late as well. So they might have just kind of got a different impression of them after that night, but then the rest, obviously, the 800th anniversary of St. Francis's birth only comes once in the history of humanity. But he was a powerful model to a lot of people, and he preached the gospel in many ways. And obviously, he's very known for preaching the gospel by his way of living. Now, one of my favorite stories about St. Francis, and I think I read this from, I believe, the Little Brothers of St. Francis, one of my favorite stories. And it was that these Franciscans are all their band of friends. This is their first. This is the original group. And Francis and I think a couple other of the friars were out, and they had to buy something at the store. They got something at the store, whatever. But they were away. And while they were away, not days' journey, just, for a few hours, these robbers came, and a robber came rather, and robbed the other Franciscans that were by. I think there were only two of them, but they were still back where they're home or whatever. And so the Franciscans were being robbed, beat them up, and sent them on their way. Not, just basically attacked them enough to get them to go away. Well, when St. Francis came back, he was incensed that one of his band of Franciscans would do something for the sake of money. And so what he had them do is put the money that they did not give to the robber, and then they took that money, he had them put it in their mouths. Now remember, this is around the 12th century, so this is not the time we have Purell all over the place. So they had to put it in their mouths and climb up a dung heap to drop the money by their mouths into the top of the dung heap to get them to understand the message of how much he valued money. Powerful, powerful story. And I always think of that because you probably know that I don't necessarily agree with stand your ground laws if they involve using a firearm. And I just kind of look at that and remember that story from St. Francis. Then, by the way, the rest of the story is then he went and found the robber, and the robber became a convert and a member of his band of merry friars. Always remember this. Franciscans are friars. They are not monks. I had to do a voiceover, and the script said monk for Franciscans, and I said monk because that's what the script said. And we got this very intense letter from a Franciscan friar. So we are friars, not monks, out in New York. So I've always remembered that Franciscans are friars. Have yourself a blessed day. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation through the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.